Well, welcome everybody. My name's Tony Bassick. I'm the moderator for this session on medicinal agriculture. And as we were coming here, we were commenting on how privileged the position we're in is. Not only it's an opportunity of a lifetime, but probably one of a century, because we actually are involved in an industry that could transform health and lives. And so it is a very exciting time to be there. And it's an exciting time because Australia also offers an environment that is considered safe, trustworthy, and has a regulatory environment. So in terms of an industry, it's growing at a faster rate than any industry is known to. It's sort of got about a 25 to 40% compound annual growth rate is talked about. How much of that is hyperbole is not is what we're going to address today. Huge expectations from consumers and patients as to what it can deliver. And we really do need to understand what is based in evidence and what is anecdotal. And so I think it's really important that the foundations of the industry are really laid down and there's evidence to support the claims that are being made in it. So to further complicate the ecosystem, it's considered an illegal drug, an illegal substance by the UN Narcotics Act. Yet it's being legalised for medicinal purposes worldwide. And so how does that fit within the regulatory environment? So we have a fantastic panel today that really covers the globe and also the market environment and right through to the local regulatory environment, both from a federal and a state level. So what we're going to do today is we'll get each panel member to briefly introduce themselves. I'll have a question to a panel member. There'll be a slight discussion, about 40 minutes of panel discussion, and then I want to leave 20 minutes for Q&A so that the audience can participate in that. And we both have, it's going to be electronic as well as with live here. So with that, I'll get everybody to give 1 minute introduction and then we'll move on. Cam?
Hi, I'm Cam Batley. I'm Chief Corporate Officer of Aurora Cannabis. We are a company that's gone, in the time I've been with them, about 3.5 years, from 35 employees to more than 3,000 worldwide. We're now operating in 25 countries. And that's kind of a good example as to what's been happening in this industry and the pace at which it's been growing.
Thanks, Cam. I'm Peter Crock. I'm CEO of Can Group, based here in Melbourne. We were the first to get through the Office of Drug Control licensing process, so the first cultivator operating in Australia.
Hi, I'm Warren Everett. I'm the Managing Director of Medifarm Labs. We're a Canadian headquartered company just north of Toronto, and I have a manufacturing facility here in Victoria, about an hour and a half south of Melbourne.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ben Quirin. I'm the Regional Managing Director for Canopy Growth, based out of here in Melbourne. Canopy Growth is a Canadian cannabis company globally. We specialise in medicinal cannabis, and we have a footprint across 16 countries across the world where we operate cultivation, manufacturing and R&D capabilities.
Hi, I'm John Skerritt. I am Deputy Secretary for Health in the Commonwealth, and I've got overall responsibility for the Office of Drug Control, which regulates the manufacture, cultivation of medicinal cannabis, and also for TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which manages patient access to medicinal cannabis. And we had our 15,000th prescription just this month.
Hi, I'm Megan Hickson. I'm the Director of Agriculture Industry Development at Agriculture Victoria, which is a state government. I've been responsible for the last 3 years of delivering some of the government's commitments to establish a local medicinal cannabis industry in Victoria and support the government deliver its commitments to legalise medicinal cannabis. Other things in my industry look at how we grow and develop agriculture industries, whether that's the wine industry, get digital adoption of technology on farm energy, and things also like how do we respond to climate change.
So thank you. So you can see a fantastic panel that can really cover all aspects of the industry. So hopefully you're getting your questions ready. Cam, 25 to 40% growth rate annually, predicted to be bigger than the beverage market by 2035. What's the fact and what's the hyperbole in this game?
There's not a lot of hyperbole. The story of medical cannabis globally right now is one of unstoppable momentum. I often call it a global megatrend, a rapid change in law, society, and business that is sweeping the globe. And there's a reason for that. We've seen country after country, some of them very surprising countries, change their attitudes with respect to medical cannabis, and the pressure is coming from the patients themselves. You take a look at the United Kingdom, for example, where at the beginning of 2018, you had a flat no from the government with respect to the idea of creating a medical cannabis system. Based on the stories of two very sick little boys with intractable epilepsy, public sympathy for patients overturned that, and the country did a 180. That's one example of how rapidly things are changing, and it's a good thing. It's helping patients, and at the same time, it's creating an unprecedented, brand new economic opportunity. We don't see the opportunity to participate in the creation of a brand new global industry very often. These are exciting times.
And so why do you see all the interest from Canadian companies into Australia? What's the attraction?
Canada, by happy accident, started first. We established a truly well-regulated medical cannabis system on a national basis before anybody else. And we got a head start there. And then the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau went ahead and said, yes, we weren't kidding. We were going to legalize cannabis for consumer use. This brought in a lot of capital. It gave Canadian companies a massive lead. And one of the first places that we looked to partner was Australia. So we, of course, are partnered with Can Group here. And one of the reasons is certainly there's an affinity between the two countries, but there are a lot of similarities. You've got good public policy for which these countries are known, good regulation, good reputations for businesses. So when you're dealing with an Australian, you know what you're going to get. They're straight shooters, and that's part of what makes Australia such an attractive place for investment in this brand new industry. And we're just at the earliest days, and Australia is establishing a measure of world leadership here. It's great to see.
Thanks. Ben, you're in both the global but also heavily focused on the Asia Pacific, and I think we've seen over the last few days people draw circles around the Asia Pacific. India and China is really where the population growth is, and presumably that's why the interest in the market it's through there. So what do you see as the prospects?
So the Asia Pacific region, footprint-wise, you've got 51% of the global population. So, and landmass is very diverse. So we're dealing with a great deal of opportunity, but we're also trying to work in how do you put in place a framework that actually makes sense? How do you enable appropriate patient access, but making sure you've got the right quality standards that apply across there? So the template we talk around is very much what's occurred in Australia. So when I'm actually going in and speaking to various parties across the region, the template that I actually referenced is Australia. We talk about what we've done from a Canadian perspective in regards to establishing a global platform that can enable us to cultivate, manufacture, and produce medicine of quality standards. And part of the discussion today is really around when we go into Asia, is it Thailand? Is it China? Is it India? Is it Malaysia? Is it New Zealand? Everyone's at a very different stage of the process at this point in time. So for us, it's, yes, I think everyone points to there's a great deal of value here and a great deal of opportunity, but it's getting people on the right journey and making sure that we're all addressing the needs for patients.
Thanks, man. Peter, you were the first to get a licence in Australia to cultivate and manufacture, and have really been at the vanguard of the movement here. So how do you see the Australian environment and what the opportunities are here, and can we be globally competitive?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. It's a good question. It is exciting times. I think the real challenge for Australia, having started, and we're now into the third year of the system here, and it really is gaining momentum. It is now back to patient access is a real focus that needs to occur. Whilst this is an opportunity commercially, it's actually an opportunity to change lives, and that should be the primary driver here, is to address the patient needs, and keeping the focus on that, ensuring that we're attracting the right quality people into the industry is really important, that we make sure it isn't just a green rush, people rushing in to make money out of this. It's actually the patients that need to drive it, and that's where we need the biggest change in Australia. The state versus federal position that we've got is, it's how we operate here in Australia. The states have started talking about harmonisation, but we really need to drive that to ensure that we've got consistency across the states. But as we do that, and delivering a product that doctors can can trust and understand. That's where the TGA GMP standard that we're working to will set Australia apart and is a global opportunity for us. So the Health Minister, Minister Hunt, last January announced that they were going to allow exports. That was to ensure that we could work from a scale that would allow this industry to establish here. So that is driving access for Australian patients first. So that's the key thing, and I think it is what the community is looking for now, is accelerating that patient access.
Fantastic. So Warren, Australia as a GMP startup manufacturer, Australia has a great reputation for commodity production, but hasn't really done very well on the manufacturing, and we've seen that in the poppy industry, where we're probably the second biggest exporter, yet we do very little value add. You know, we're $500 million of a $17 billion market. Do you see it as a different opportunity for the medicinal cannabis to actually have the whole pipeline developed in Australia?
Yes, I think there's two ways to answer that. I think you look first off as the opportunity. I think the first mover advantage piece is critical. I think Canada, as Cam said a second ago, Canada sort of fell on their feet into the medicinal cannabis space, and the first mover advantage has put them in good stead for it to operate as a global company out of Canada. We have the same sort of first mover advantage here, with the added benefit of operating under the TGA. So with the TGA, I would say that the two words I look for here is gold standard, to which we operate under. Canada deployed their framework under GPP. We operate under a GMP framework, which basically gives us mutual recognition globally for us to export product, which is, as much as we're all here for patients, as Peter mentioned, there is that natural bell curve that we need to go through for patient access here. But for us to function as a company, we need revenue, and revenue comes from international exports, and we can obtain that under our gold standard of product creation. However, in the future, there is that risk. So on the opposite side of this, what limitations may we have in the future in terms of being able to manufacture a product that is, financially able to support the industry here? And that's where I think probably I'd say, speaking on behalf of Medifarm Labs here, we're unique in the industry ourselves. You need to have a finger on the pulse in terms of the commodity price. So if you look at the manufacturing of product today, the highest cost in the manufacturing part of the product, the process, is actually the cultivation. That's where a lot of the energy and the costs go into. So identifying low-cost cultivation at a high quality is actually extremely important. And if you don't have vision on how to do that, Cam and I just got back from Thailand. We are looking at Southeast Asia. I'm sure Cam and Aurora are also looking into regions in South America. You need to be able to identify how you can get commodity price down. However, still, we will want to consider the fact that we can bring product into Australia, manufacture it under an Australian stamp, and get the accreditation under GMP, would allow us to export that product internationally and still maintain a viable manufacturing business in this industry.
So, John, the ODC has been mentioned by every speaker, and clearly it's seen as the gatekeeper and an important one to maintain the safety and the standards of the regulatory environment. Perhaps you'd like to comment on that environment and where you see it evolving to in terms of growing an industry.
Well, regulators should be facilitators as well as gatekeepers, and government, in setting the regulations almost 3 years ago, made a clear decision that Australia was going to have a cannabis industry based on cannabis as a medicinal product, and therefore requiring certain quality standards, whether in manufacture or in finished product standards. There was a recognition also that we didn't want to go the route of the opiate industry and maps of commodities. And in keeping with the theme of this whole conference, the government made a clear decision that the focus for exports wouldn't be on bulk cannabis as a commodity. Yes, cannabis products as intermediates can be exported, but they were very keen to enable finished dose forms to be exported, whether that's bud for vaporisation or whether it's oils or whatever. And that's the direction the industry is heading. There is a challenge always on price of cultivation, and especially as electricity and water prices go up, indoor protected cultivation can be, protected cropping can be an expensive option. And as someone who was around when the debate with government was happening about should this only be restricted to putting in the greenhouse situation or an indoor situation, the decision was no. Outdoor cultivation in Australia is permitted now, and there are a couple of businesses that are in that business of outdoor cultivation. The downside, of course, is that perhaps with the exception of tropical Queensland, you're only going to get one or maybe two if your sowing times are right and your genetics is right. You're only going to get a maximum of 2 crops per season as opposed to, say, 4. And that's the business model that some companies, for example, in Tasmania have decided to adopt.
So do you see we've just heard that the big price factor push is going to be around the cultivation side of things, and some countries are going to open sort of farming situations, but here it's more in the regulatory it's much more confined to, glasshouse growth.
No. There's no requirement in law, and as I just said, there's a couple of companies that have built their business model. I mean, this is no state secret. There's one company that decided to use an immigration detention centre that was no longer needed. No, it's not on Christmas Island. Within continental or within Australian territory, I should say. And so that's one model where they're cultivating outdoors. We have several companies that have an outdoor cultivation model. As I've said, the trouble is, of course, that their cultivation is then seasonally constrained. And so some of those companies will also consider having a winter indoor cultivation model too. So they're really business decisions for the company. There's always a challenge, as a former Aggie, one of the challenges, of course, with the outdoor cultivation for a crop like cannabis is you'll get the risk of variability in product. And so these are all the trade-offs. But where Australia is positioning itself is, I guess it's fair to say, in the premium end of the market. Now, you can't be ignorant of production costs, and you can't be blind to what the Germans or the Dutch or other European countries will pay in that market. But we are aiming for a premium medicinal quality product market. So
it synchronises well with the need for defined products in terms of TGA approval for them as a medicine? How do you control
there's two
that?
pathways. So we are hoping and expecting that there will be some products that will go through and be fully approved TGA medicines and therefore available at your corner pharmacy. But we also recognise that there'll be another pathway for these products as unapproved medicines for our own patients. And as I've said, we hit 15,000 prescriptions last month. But the export component of the industry will be an incredibly important driver in giving the industry volumes and also maintaining that quality reputation.
Thank you. So Megan, as the state that really has been at the vanguard of driving the medicinal cannabis industry here and been closely involved with policy on the agriculture side and on the other, how does Victoria view the current situation and where do you see it heading? And bearing in mind always our cousins from across the ocean at New Zealand who are thinking in a very different way, and we heard discussion about the federal and state issues. How do you see that playing through?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Look, I'm really positive about it, and I think it's got an exciting future. I think when the Victorian government got involved and made their commitments in 2014, kind of like Canada, there was nothing else in Australia. It wasn't legal. There was no even budding of an industry, and we've seen huge development in that time. I think we got involved. Our focus has been really on how do we develop a local industry that it supplies patients in Australia as well as an export market. And I think both of those parts remain priorities and they're really important. We've focused a lot on research. I think we've developed over 200 proprietary strains profiles, and that's been a key part for us about supporting industry develop here, as well as our understanding and expertise in navigating the system. So I see we've had a lot of investment in Victoria, which is really positive. We obviously know that there's a long lead time for companies here to get products to market, and that's important because we know our regulatory framework that we're banking on is really about a safe reputation. I'm looking forward to seeing those products become available to patients here, see how that makes it more affordable, and then what happens in export markets. And I think I'm really interested in, particularly my panel members, What are the key export markets? We know there's a lot of speculation, and seeing that come to fruition is really important. So it's pretty exciting times, I think.
Does anybody want to jump in? They want to
Yeah,
hear from
I
you.
think the export market is exactly right, but I think the work that's been done at La Trobe University specifically is so, I guess, reflective of how Australia has perceived this industry. If you look at Canada, quite quickly moved from a medicinal framework into a recreational framework, which kind of diluted the fact that we still in Australia see cannabis as a medicine. But the work specifically done within La Trobe University, cannabis is not 0 and 1. You either got it or you don't. And it's not just CBD or THC, which is the next layer of detail. The plant has hundreds of cannabinoids in it, and each cannabinoid today could be a symptom treatment for many different conditions that people face. And we're at the cusp of what I would say a revolution. And the work starts, from my perspective, at the agricultural level, being able to assess the genetic, identify different ways to manipulate up and down percentages of cannabinoids, and then getting it out to an extract, and having a library of different cannabinoids in their different formats, and then being able to put that out into the medicinal market globally lands us in good stead for the next 3, 5, I don't have a crystal ball, I wish I did, but quite a lot of years ahead of us because of the work that's done from, I guess, a federal and state level, and I think that's tremendous, the way we've deployed it that way.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one? Ben or Cam?
I think the thing we're seeing at the moment, and Megan, to your point, the export opportunity is significant. Okay, I think particularly with the standards that are being set out of Australia now, people are looking at that and saying, what is the roadmap to actually having a locally produced product that can be exported? The discussions I have across Asia today are very much around, yes, there's a named patient approach that can be achieved in various parts of the world, but when do we get to the opportunity of actually having that product that will be available? And, like my peers across here, we're working very actively to make that a reality. The thing for me is, and very focused on, is keep away from the PowerPoint and make it real. Right? We need to get to the position where we have local cultivation, we have local manufacturing, and we have the ability to produce a medicine of quality. And that in itself will actually enable us to actually set up a global export play.
Cam, do you want to at all?
To further the discussion about taking this regionally, taking this across Asia, the thing that both Canadians and Australians have going for us is our credibility. It needs to be protected. Those who are following the cannabis sector will have seen that we've had some difficulties in Canada with some companies that broke the freaking rules, and that has hurt all of us. That should be a cold shower wake-up for everybody, not just in Canada in this business, but in Australia as well. We have to make sure that we remind ourselves that there are catastrophic risks associated with breaking the rules, because the whole world is watching. I was meeting with the Thai Food and Drug Administration last week in Bangkok, and they were fully aware of the problems that we have had in Canada. And that's not a reflection on the Health Canada regulators. That, as a group of public servants, I've never seen more professional than that. These are public servants with the same sense of mission that we have in the private sector, that will pick up a phone on their mobile in the evening or on the weekend. The onus is on us as business people to make sure that we preserve the credibility of this. Now, that said, I think the credibility remains exceedingly high, and once again, that goes back to the level of rigorous regulation and the reputation of our regulators. And they lead for us. That story is there in markets around Asia and Latin America and other parts of the world before we ever enter the room. And so if we're careful to keep that regulation professional, or that reputation professional, and also as Canadians, not to push the consumer legalization story. I want to end on that point. We do not presume to tell other countries how to manage their regulations around cannabis. We can speak about the Canadian experience, as you can speak about the Australian experience, but what my own belief is that these discussions with respect to whether a country wants to proceed to that next step at any point of consumer legalization, that will happen organically, and it's a discussion to be had within that country.
Peter, do you want to?
Yeah, and I'll put my hat on as chairman of the MCIA, Medicinal Cannabis Industry Australia, where the first licence holders have come together to form an industry body, both to provide feedback to the regulator and in fact the legislative review process that's just undergone recently, we were part of that. But from the MCIA perspective, again, the industry believes that this is a medical play only, and that's got to be the focus. So that's absolutely, I'd reinforce what Cam just said.
John?
It's all very nice to share the love of the regulatory system. Although I think it's important to emphasise that it is evolving, and when it was set up, we were moving into uncharted territory in Australia. We didn't want to go the direction. There wasn't any other country that our political masters felt was an appropriate model. So we developed an Australian model, and the agreement, therefore, always was to review it after 2 years. Now, at the time, there was a lot of concern, especially from law enforcement. And while we sit here and talk about cannabis as a agricultural product, as a medicine, as an export opportunity, we shouldn't forget that organised crime still use cultivation of cannabis as a way of laundering large amounts of money. It's funny, notwithstanding the high degree of consumer acceptability, I should also add they use things like illegal cigarettes, for which excise hasn't been paid on to launder money too. And they don't use wheat or cotton, I've noticed. But to cut to the chase, so the original system that was put in place had a range of regulatory controls and requirements and information requirements for cultivators, for people who wanted to get into the industry. We wanted to know about their business associates. We wanted to know if they are fit and proper people. And you can see by the upstanding nature of the other people on this panel, they're very fit and proper. But
We still have to prove it.
yeah. But a review was done. Now, we're a few hours too early because the actual review, I'm advised, and this is up to someone sitting up in Parliament House a clerk of the Senate, to be precise. We're advised the review will be released at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Strange things happen, it could be tomorrow, but we're hoping it'll be today. And I encourage you to go, it'll be on the Parliament House website, and so just Google Narcotic Drugs Act Review. And so that review really looked at whether some of the administrative requirements were not adding value. You know, were we after the same information twice? Did we really need to know that your great aunt had a speeding ticket in 1932? So the sort of level of detail, is it adding any value or security to the system? Is it actually impeding industry development? Is the structure of requiring separate cultivation, manufacture and commercial production licences a challenge if you want to bring in new genetics at short notice and so forth? So I'd love to be able to tell you what government's going to announce, but I want to have a job tomorrow. And so all I'll do is I am able to give you a hint, but I think that there'll be widespread support for the recommendations. And to use words from a Prime Minister, there will be a strong emphasis of congestion busting. So watch this space, and hopefully late afternoon, evening, the report will be out and available.
Sounds great. We're looking forward to it. So there is a tension in the ecosystem at the moment, though. We have the consumers, for once, are way ahead pushing, wanting the material released. We have, like in Australia, the AMA saying basically there's very few properly regulated, probably one or two, literally, you could count them on your finger, properly regulated trials to show efficacy. And so where do you see research playing a role in this environment? Because I'd like to bring this up because that's a really important part of the ecosystem, and I'm happy for any member of the panel to comment on that. And what's the advantage in Australia of having within our sort of research environment that you see it and the opportunity for us?
Yeah, look, I'll start at least, but I think we'll probably all be saying the same thing. There's no doubt that the science needs to catch up with, and because of prohibition, there has been no work done with cannabis throughout the world. So from a scientific perspective, what an exciting prospect to have the doors open where we can work with it. So from a regulatory perspective, we've got to try and make this workable so that we can accelerate that process. But yeah, so there's a lot of work to do. Another important thing, though, is to say that we talk about patient access, and clearly the doctor is a huge part of that process. This isn't about educating doctors. Doctors don't need educating, but they do need supporting data so that they can make the right decisions.
I think that one of the hard things, though, from my perspective, is as I said before, each particular, like, the amount of variations of a cannabis plant is infinite. And when you consider that, and each particular use case that you might have as a symptom, it's going to take quite a long time for us to get to the actual finite outcome of what specific percentages of each particular cannabinoid and terpene profile will treat a symptom. And I say that I'm probably a bit more socially progressive in my thinking around how we go about this. Obviously, research is important, but also there's no data supporting that cannabis has ever killed anybody. No one's overdosed from cannabis before. So I think that as a doctor, I'm sympathetic, because if the amount of variations of cannabis is infinite, being able to prescribe it is absolutely impossible, because you're ultimately trying to identify which particular strain will treat them. And if you're just thinking about high THC or high CBD as your definition of a symptom treatment, then ultimately the patient will have very different effects from taking that drug each time they take it, which is concerning. And as a doctor, I don't necessarily think that they went to university to learn all the different variables of cannabis. So we've got a long way to go, but maybe you want to add to that.
So we are, as an industry, alongside colleagues in academia, we are conducting clinical trials with respect to the clinical utility of cannabis around the world. That's happening. It has to happen. That said, it shouldn't hold us up. And as much as the AMA has been hesitant about medical cannabis, so has the Canadian Medical Association, and remains that way. But the most important fact for Canadian patients has been that the membership of the Medical Association in Canada has not waited. We now have more than 20,000 physicians who've written a prescription for medical cannabis. And as a result, we now have more than 400,000 Canadians with a prescription from their doctor to manage the symptoms of their health condition with medical cannabis. I see things with respect to medical cannabis a little bit differently from other areas of medicine after spending my career in the biopharmaceutical industry. And the way I would sum it up is this. When we're talking about a disease-modifying therapy, something like a hypertension medicine or a cancer drug, we have to go through the clinical trial process, and whether it's a cannabis-based medicine or not, it must go through the same level of discipline. However, I would submit that there is a different level of evidence required when it comes to symptom management, and this is where cannabis shines. This is what it is used for. It's used for pain, it's used for the spasticity in multiple sclerosis and bowel disease and anxiety disorders, and on and on and on. And if a patient tells you that their pain is less, or their anxiety is less, or their seizures are fewer, we have to take them at their word. So that's part of the answer back to the medical community. It is respectful, it is in agreement with respect to some of the claims that we all have a responsibility to deal with, where there are those who say that cannabis cures cancer. I do not want to see a situation where a patient does not accept proper, proven treatment for a serious disease like cancer and assumes that cannabis is a disease-modifying therapy where it has not been proven to be so. On symptoms, I think we have to have a different conversation with the medical community.
I would support the fact that it's important to be quite clear there's a difference between amelioration of symptoms, say in cancer, rather than treatment of a disease. Where I perhaps differ is that I think it is still possible, and it would certainly aid with adoption and rational use, to be able to collect that data on alleviation of symptoms. I mean, there's a hot debate out there in the medical community as to whether medicinal cannabis can replace a lot of opioids, and we all know that we have an opioid crisis out there. We need good evidence-based, objective data collection just on that. And yes, if individuals by their own voting with their feet are turning to cannabis instead of opioids, that needs to be documented. But I think that we shouldn't shy away from attempting to collect good data on that, because that will really help with rational prescribing.
So we've got, thanks, John. So perhaps I think it's time to open up. We've gone from cultivation, manufacture, efficacy, regulation, consumer. We've covered it all. We've raised what the panel sees as the issues. I'd love to throw it out to the audience now for a Q&A. Or you've got some already online.
Great. Yes, we do have quite a lot of questions flowing through. So I'm just going to direct the first one to Warren. Is Medifarm seeking to import cannabis for inputs in your Australian products? If so, why and which country are we looking at? And how do we address the traceability issues around that?
That's very specific.
Yes, great question. So I guess in simple form, the answer is yes, where we are able to under the regulatory framework. So, we have to adhere to very strict rules under the regulatory framework to which countries we can import product from. As we talk about international exportation, we need to adhere to things like GACP, GAP, which are agricultural practices with specific standards behind them, and the country has to have mutual recognition for us to import, but product can be imported internationally today. Within the same realms of ensuring the product, where it comes from, is not dissimilar to me buying product from my cultivation partners all across Australia. So insurance that the certificate of analysis meets specific requirements, that there's no use of pesticides, that it meets all of the different regulatory standards around that. To where we're importing product from, ultimately it comes down to ensuring the countries meet those standards first and foremost, but second of all, it's going to come down to commodity pricing in the end, and ensuring we can have a low-cost product, because as much as we want patients to have product access, when it's $600 a month, it's unobtainable for almost everyone in the room.
Great, thanks for that, Warren. I've got a question out the front. Can I just ask also, make it really nice and short and sharp, just questions, no comments, and please direct your question.
Hi, thanks. Great panel, thank you very much. Antonio Castillo from Biotech Bridge. I was trying to invite Rafael Meshulam from Israel to join the panel. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. And in conversation with him, he really stressed and touched some of the points here. When the industry will show some solid emphasis and energy as like building GMP manufacturing facilities, growing cannabis with the same intensity and passion, bring more evidence with clinical trials, try to bring more clarity. We know that there are more than 140 phytocannabinoids and counting. I totally believe in the benefit that we can bring to the patients, but when the industry is going to embrace the opportunity from all the aspects, but with scientific evidence and clinical trial. Thank you.
Sorry, there's another one back there too.
Good questions. Two things. GMP, it's happening. In fact, at Aurora, we've got 2 European Union GMP facilities and 2 more that are about to achieve that certification, plus our distributor in Europe. I have a sense that that could become a global standard. It's the highest standard in the world and the same standard to which European pharmaceutical companies are held. And the more we can collectively reach those standards and achieve those same standards, the more the credibility, and that will help us around the world. Second thing is the clinical research. It's underway. Companies like Canopy and Aurora are funding currently scores of clinical trials. They're not the same scale of clinical trials that you see in the pharmaceutical industry with tens of thousands or more patients in a phase 3 trial. But they are significant, they're useful, and they'll give us specific insights into the use of cannabis on specific ailments. It's already happening, it's already underway, and it's getting bigger.
And just on that one quickly, with the Olivia Newton-John Cancer Research Institute here in Melbourne, we're working. And in fact, Daddy Mary from Israel is involved in that trial as well. So, and that one's actually focused on a wellness measure for the patient to try and quantify and show that you're having an impact on symptoms.
Oh, sorry,
one
Megan.
thing from a state government perspective. So we've obviously got GMP level facilities in Melbourne, which has made a big impact in terms of being able to support industry establish here, access those facilities at that high standard, while they also build their own GMP level facilities, which is really exciting.
Good morning. Stuart Gordon from CSIRO Ag and Food, ex-Trobe Aggie. A couple of looking for comments from John and Tony and Peter, perhaps. The first comment for John, how do you see regulation of THC from its more temperate CBD cousin in the future, with the in the context of broadacre growers harvesting the CBD. And Peter and Tony, you talked a little bit about the cost of production. As a plant breeder, we know that cost of production can be reduced by yields and quality factors, and I wondered about the breeding programs within Australia at the moment.
Well, I'll start off with the question about cultivation and regulation around broadacre crops of CBD-rich versus THC-rich cannabis. We are constrained by the United Nations International Convention. We've got to align with that because that's absolutely fundamental to us being able to import and export with certain countries. At the moment, the requirements around a crop, but even if it's high in CBD only and therefore not likely to be diverted down to the local pub, the requirements are still that it be treated separately and that it is treated as cannabis. That means that we're required to have certain security around the supply chain and certain security around the cultivation. But in practical terms, if a company only is cultivating CBD type medicinal cannabis, the security requirements are not as prescriptive and not as high as if they were cultivating high THC strains. That's something we work with the companies on a case-by-case basis. But just foreshadowing the next session, at the moment, internationally and in Australia, industrial hemp farmers cannot offtake their crop for use in CBD product manufacture. That's a point of some tension, but it derives from the black and white law under the International Convention for Narcotic Drugs.
But interestingly, John, in different states here, we have different levels of THC that they can grow that high CBD in, which I think
But
is a
it
bit
is
of
still
confusion.
but it is still industrial hemp they're producing, not
that's
medicinal
right.
cannabis.
Peter?
Yeah, I was going to make that point, but I'll get on to the research and the accelerated breeding programs. And in terms of what the Victorian government and La Trobe have done with the Agri-Bio Centre, it's 75% Victorian government, but the accelerated breeding, the genomics work that's going to be driven out here, we had Jonathan Page from Canada came out. He was the first to sequence the cannabis genome, and he said, "I'm green with envy." He said the Canadian Ag Department still don't recognise cannabis as a crop, and we've got a $288 million facility that is absolutely state-of-the-art. And the best parallel is with what they've done with the dairy industry here. Every dairy animal in Australia is on their genetic database, and they can take a DNA sample from a 6-week-old bull calf and tell you what its progeny are going to produce within 1%. If we use that, and we are using that same computing power and capability with cannabis, we're going to make huge advances. And I think with both the agricultural and medical research capability in Melbourne and Australia, we're going to drive changes in this area. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we can bring a lot of the technologies that are in broadacre that Australia's been very important in developing into this industry, because there is a lot of yield benefits that can come from that. I mean, another area is going to be disease resistance as well. It's important. I suppose from my perspective, one of the things I would like to do to see the industry advance is that, like the grains industry has done in Australia, where they've got a seed bank that's nationally funded and is, open to all research community to access, I would like to see the governments actually move towards doing that with medicinal cannabis seed and provide a seed bank that the research community can very quickly work with and breed and provide unique germplasm that's optimised for our conditions, because they're going to be different to others. And especially, you've got now, we've heard the open farming, open to a point farming solution. We've got the glasshouse thing, and so each of those will probably need different breeding strategies to optimise, and also different technologies. So I think it's an exciting time. The Commonwealth's now funded the medicinal research ag hub that we have, with Commonwealth funding to see us grow the sector. And I think together with what the state government's been doing here in Victoria, there's a unique opportunity to really grow both industries, actually, the hemp industry as well as the medicinal cannabis industry.
Great, thanks Tony. We've got a question that's very related to this as well. Who is the lowest cost producer currently in the world for medicinal cannabis? And where do you expect the global supply of cannabis will be in the long term? So who are our biggest competitors in the long term?
These two.
I think globally now things are evolving quite significantly, and we're starting to see footprint expand into geographies like Latin America, Southern Africa, and now you're starting to see regions like Thailand at discussion points and so on. I think at the end of the day, it's really going to come down to we talk about cultivation, the cost of cultivation. Labour is a major cost factor. It is very labour intensive still today on how we're operating that side of it. So I think we need to take those considerations into play, but at the same time, how do you actually take that product and actually enable you to export that or produce that for the local and domestic market? So to answer your question, I mean, we can talk about places like Lesotho, we can talk about places like Colombia, and where low cost to be able to grow these things, and you do broad acre grow. So I think that's, from our perspective, that's where you can drive the cost down, but it needs to be tested and proven longer term.
Let me add to that, and I agree with what you have said and where you're going. We at Aurora, we look at it this way. There are a couple of ways of producing any good on an economic basis. In manufacturing, for example, some companies choose to produce in developing countries where there are low labor costs. Others choose to produce in developed countries using a very high degree of automation. In the end, both approaches are competitive. We are doing both at Aurora. We are doing outdoor grow. We're operating in equatorial regions. We're also doing the most high-tech cannabis production in the world with the highest level of automation and robotics. What we are finding is that the true cost of production is converging. As you apply this technology and you get consistency out of your crops and very high yields and high levels of active pharmaceutical ingredients, the cost comes way down. And at the same time, I have heard claims at different conferences around the world that in this country, equatorial country, you can produce for 10 cents a gram. No 5. No, minus 10 cents a gram. We'll give you money back. It gets a little crazy. When you actually add the cost of quality assurance and other real costs, and the cost of actually entering highly regulated markets, such as achieving EU GMP standards, the actual cost is converging with high-tech production. So we're looking at both. There are no answers, but I don't think you're going to find that one will be, on a revolutionary basis, significantly cheaper than the other.
Great, thanks for that, Cameron. We've got a question over here from the floor.
Lachlan Grout from Hemp Farms Australia. My question is, if there's such a focus on cost of production per hectare, and obviously there are quite a few passionate people up on this panel about a high quality product at a low cost, will it turn into an industry that's driven by low imports and high production output, or will it be, an industry driven by money, capital, passion in getting genetics that work broadacre as well as indoor, winter tolerant as well as summer tolerant, and being able to produce a high value crop out of that? Or will it just be a turnover of bringing in low cost produce, using already established processing methods here to produce a medium to high quality end product that may not be as controlled because you're not producing it here?
It could be all of the above, Lachlan. You're correct. In agriculture, scale is everything. There's no doubt about that. And in Australia, we know that as well as anyone. We produce some of the most efficient product from a pretty harsh environment. As Cam said, though, you can layer technology over the top of it, and that is the angle that we're taking in terms of what we're doing down here. What's really exciting, though, is that this is all untapped, and the opportunities in the research and the accelerated breeding and other aspects to what can come right through to manufacturing. We're also partnering with CSIRO and got some leading technology we're looking at that will feed back into the manufacturing facilities like Warren. So all of the above is possible, and there's space for a lot of players in all of that. There isn't going to be one single player that's going to come in and dominate this. It's going to be spread across a raft of different approaches and really exciting approaches.
it's a race to the start. We're a long way from the bottom, and I think ultimately, with genetic, the latter of that statement is so true. And I said, cannabis is not cannabis, is not cannabis. It's not 0 and 1. Unique genetics, complex genetics will win over time, and you'll have something unique. But even if we just took all these water bottles here as one use case for a downstream product and said beverages, there's a multi-billion-dollar market right there. Topicals, food, edibles. Just continue on and look out there any type of product and say that it's infused with cannabis, and that's where the future will be. The crystal ball, again, I wish I had one, but we've got a long way to go.
Ben, did anybody else want to say? And I'll close up at this point. No? Quite happy. Well, thank you all very much for coming. It just leaves me to both thank the panel, but I'd like to make the comment that those of you who were fortunate enough to hear Howard Shapiro yesterday talking about addressing the problems of malnutrition in Africa, he talked about the uncommon collaboration, and I think it's so pleasing, and that's really setting up alliances between governments, multinationals who are food producers, governments and things like that, to work collaboratively to solve those problems. And I think you can sort of see from the composition of the panel here, where we have some of the largest competitors in the market, we have the regulators, we have the manufacturers, that if we can start having this conversation and dialogue early in the development of this market, then I think we can generate the solutions that, and at the end of the day, that are benefits to the consumer. So thank you very much. Thank the panel for it, and it's been a fantastic session. Thanks.
Round of applause for Tony and the panel. Thank you very much. Now, just a quick announcement. If at 3 p.m, if you're still very interested in what's happening in the cannabis space and really looking to dive deep and have a conversation, we've actually got a 3 p.m. session with Peter Crock at the Can Group and my co-founder there, Cal. Raise your hand at the back. If you find him at the Victorian Government stand just around the corner, we'll be having a fireside chat. That's at 3 o'clock today. So thanks again for the panel, and we'll see you in 15 minutes around hemp.
Thanks.